Thank you, Sean. It's great to see a couple people I know in the chat. I just wanted to give a shout out to Scott from Harlem Children's Zone, who is a longtime collaborator. We're going to talk about you a little later, so excited for your comments in the chat. And also one of our partners, design partners, Michelle, is here, who worked with us on Mouse, and we're going to talk about that a little later. Just wanted to say I'm so excited to be here with Omoiye. We are longtime collaborators. We've worked together now at two very large and complicated organizations. Omoiye will introduce herself, but just very quickly, for those that don't know me, I'm the founder and CEO here at Additive. We're a brand consulting firm that only works with organizations that have a social impact aim. And I think one of our key findings, having worked with federated nonprofits, universities, hospitals, health systems, foundations that are working with many grantees, is individually, we can make an impact for sure, but together we can do so much more good. That is the additive impact. And that's why we're excited to talk to you a little bit about making sure we have a shared framework, but ensuring that there's flexibility within it to reflect and respect local communities. So with that, really excited to be with you. And I'm going to hand it over to Omoiye to say a quick hello, and then we're going to dive into the themes for today.
Thank you, Hayley. I am Omoiye Kinney, Chief Marketing Officer at United Way Worldwide. I have been in my role for about 3 years now. My primary responsibility is I am the brand steward for this global nonprofit. I have a very long background and history in nonprofits, having worked for some of the largest nonprofits in the country, more than 20 years. If anyone's interested, my career started in local news. I was a news producer. So my entire career has been all about how to tell the story. Storytelling is at the heart of what I do. It's my passion. And so I'm excited to talk to you today about the work that we've been doing with Additive in a number of different iterations of my career, but really talking to you about branding and how do you tell your story so that you drive the needle and make impact.
Awesome. Well, again, I think hopefully our complementary points of view will be helpful. On the consulting side, obviously, we're working across a range of organizations. So as you'll hear, Omoiye and I work together on the United Way Worldwide branding, as well as the YMCA of the USA. And Omoiye has also obviously worked at other notable organizations, and I've worked with organizations like WWF, HCZ, St. Jude, and many more. So excited to be here and obviously share the experiences that we can. So you'll see and hear from us throughout. I think it's always important to sort of set up the value of brand. And ironically, I was just on a panel this morning about intellectual property and brand valuation. And this, I think, encapsulates a lot of what we're talking about. I think, fortunately, the social sector now understands the importance of investing in brand. But, this is a quote from like the early 1900s from Jon Stewart, not to be confused with a comedian, but the former chairman of Quaker, maker of my favorite breakfast food. But, he said, if this business was split up, I'd take the brands, the trademarks, and goodwill. You could have all the bricks and mortar, and I'd still fare better than you. And I think that's really what we're talking about today, which is balancing brand and risk mitigation together with brand elevation, and making sure that the framework is there to protect ourselves, but also ensuring that we continue to show pathways for people to engage with our brand so they can co-create and feel a sense of ownership and pride around it. We just recently did research with folks who engage with nonprofits in earned and contributed revenue capacities. And one of the things we saw, the top drivers are, do I see myself as part of this community? So not just what you're doing as an organization, whether it's a foundation, whether it is a social impact fund, whether it is a nonprofit, NGO, et cetera, but is there a pathway for me to engage with it? Omoiye, I know you've lived this firsthand. You've been doing a lot of brand tracking and making the case to your board and to the network. Do you want to just talk quickly about branding in the social sector specifically?
Sure, absolutely. As you all know, the social sector is a really crowded space. There are upwards of 10 million nonprofits globally, more than 2 million in the US alone. So there's fierce competition for that shared space. We're constantly, even though we're partners and consider ourselves sister organizations, often we are in competition for the same audiences, the same donors, the same corporate attention, media attention. And so having a strong brand is essential when you think about donor trust and loyalty. It's really important that you lean into your brand and that you have a solid brand. When it relates to fundraising and impact, again, I work very closely with our fundraising team. We always say we're like the Wonder Twins, our two departments, because brand and fundraising go hand in hand. And we know that when you have a really strong brand, it's more likely that those pathways to engagement through fundraising, individual donors, corporation, and foundation support is more likely to be open for you. And then brand strength, of course, when we're looking at partnering or aligning ourselves with organizations who have very similar missions or CSR objectives. Foundations are more likely to fund nonprofits that do a great job of telling their story. That's part of the reason why Hayley and I have been working on this United Way brand for the last 2 years, is because we recognized that we were selling ourselves short and how we communicated who we are, what we do, and the impact that we deliver in community. So we really want to invest in that. And then, of course, when you're looking at engaging volunteers, they are more likely to align themselves with organizations that they have shared values. So again, that's all of this matters in the social sector when you're thinking about your brand and your framework and how you connect with audiences and potential donors and funders.
So just want to sort of share what Omoiye and I are going to walk through today. I'm going to set up sort of the big themes and key takeaways. When we wrap this up, we'll sort of restate it just so hopefully it sticks. But I think there's sort of 5 big principles we've been thinking about a lot, especially if you're an organization that's doing work in multiple communities. You know, no two communities are alike. That's certainly true of Omoiye's organization. It's certainly true of our work previously with the Y and many other organizations. So many of you, I know, again, we've got many of our friends from Harlem Children's Zone on the phone, certainly focused on the 97 blocks, but also doing work in Atlanta, Oakland, Newark, and many other communities in partnership with many others on the call. You know, I think the way we think about it is brand is really a living system. So yes, you shouldn't be doing a big brand project every year. You should be sort of establishing that framework, that foundation, but it doesn't mean it's fixed. The key is to continue to listen and respond to your community, whether that's community listening, whether it's quantitative research, and you have to continue to adapt, right? And be responsive. That's really important because, as we all know, things are changing daily in terms of contextual forces, and we need to be able to be responsive to that. I think the key, though, is if you don't have that strong framework or foundation, which is point 2 and theme 2 that we're going to talk about today, you can be very reactive and chaotic. And I think it's really important that, yes, you understand that it is an ecosystem and it is living, but there needs to be a shared framework. You know, when I did some work with MIT, probably about 15 years ago at this point, one of the vice deans said to me, you know, when doing our brand work, we want a playground. We don't want a prison, right? You want a playground, if you think about it, still has a fence, right? But there's room to jump, skip, hop. And I think that's really how we have to think about the framework. It's got to be a fence that sort of contains our shared values, shared beliefs, but there still has to be room to move so that you can be responsive to different audiences. That then leads to the 3rd theme we're going to talk about today, which is the flexibility factor. We do need to be responsive. Right now, many of us are navigating sort of how to talk about DEI, the language. The truth is, I think very few of us, if any of us, are actually changing the actions we're taking, but we do need to consider sort of some of the realities that impact our funding, right? That's the flexibility factor. But if you have a strong framework, you're not changing your values, and you're not changing your commitments, but you may have to change frames. And that could be true if you're in global contexts. Omoiye will talk about this a little later. When we did testing in 16 countries, what resonates in the US doesn't necessarily resonate in South Korea or Nigeria or India or Colombia or Argentina. So you need to think about how to be flexible depending on audiences, locations, et cetera. The 4th big theme we're going to cover today is this idea of brand participation and co-creation. There have been some great books about it, written by some awesome folks. Many of you, I'm sure, read Henry Tim's and Jeremy Hyman's books, but I think this is sort of certainly true of all the work we've done, and Omoiye will talk about this in the context of United Way, which is, Particularly for those of you that are bigger organizations, sometimes what happens, and we saw this in the research, is they think you don't need them, right? Individual donors, particularly mass and middle market donors, you're large. You've been around a long time. You don't need me. What can I, as one person, do to affect a complicated social issue? So they have to be pathways for participation and co-creation, and that's going to be a big theme we talk about. And then lastly, we got to think about emerging technologies. I know many of us are integrating AI, predictive models and tools into the work we're doing. Some of you are embracing virtual reality and augmented reality to connect people to issues that may be in totally different contexts. You can create and forge connections. That has to be through the lens of a strategic framework. One of the things that is worrying us and keeping Omoiye and I up at night is you can have folks who take tools and just throw them in ChatGPT or Claude or whatever the AI format is without your voice input, without the right sort of inputs. You're going to sound like every other nonprofit trying to change lives and save lives, right? So you really have to think strategically about embracing some of these tools. So I know that's an ambitious agenda. We're going to spend the most time. We have some cases peppered throughout just to share some concrete examples. So it's not Omoiye and I just speaking about abstract ideas, but we're going to spend the bulk of the time on the United Way case. The other cases I'm just going to sort of quickly roll through, and hopefully we'll continue to discuss key themes. Omoiye, anything else you'd add in terms of the themes and takeaways we're going to cover?
No, I think you did a great job with that, Hayley.
Awesome. So for those of you that have worked with me for a long time, you'll know this quote because I use it often. And I think this is going to set up our first theme, which is a brand is a living entity. And this is obviously a quote from a couple of decades ago, but still holds true. And it's from Michael Eisner, the former CEO of Disney. And he really talked about or thought about brand as a living entity that's either enriched or undermined cumulatively over time, the product of 1,000 small gestures. And I think that's really important because I think people can often think about brand as just, the strategy, the story, the message, the sort of visual identity or the visual expression, but it's actually every interaction. So whether it's with a major gift officer, a strategic partner, whoever it may be, that can either build up or tear down a brand. So the idea of a framework should be the biggest theme that we take away today. But again, it's got to be fluid, not fixed. So a couple of themes we're going to touch on, and then I'm going to kick it over to Omoiye. He's going to walk through a sort of a very recent, although we've been at it for 2+ years, Omoiye. Just the idea of brands being a living entity, they've got to evolve to stay relevant. I think one of the things we've done with language testing is we've seen how language has shifted. Omoiye can talk about this a little more later, but when we did the why branding, when I led that in 2008 to 2010, the backdrop was yes, we can. No point of view or political statement. That just was what the backdrop was at the time. When we replicated the research in 2017, frames had changed. The way people think, some terms that weren't polarizing in 2008 were in 2018. So you need to continue to listen and evolve to stay relevant. As I just shared with the Michael Eisner quote, every interaction shapes a reaction. So those small moments matter. That's really important for all of us who are brand managers. I think enduring brands, if you think about them, they're always finding that delicate balance between consistency and flexibility. And, as I said before, brand strength really comes from shared ownership. And that's particularly important for those of you that are managing internal teams. It's not just the marketing and communications team. As Omoiye mentioned, she's lockstep Wonder Twins with philanthropy, as well as all the other teams. And I've seen Omoiye work with the team, just a cross-functional group working at it. So I think the first thing we want to think about is how do we build brands that evolve and endure? We're going to sort of explore, and Omoiye is going to walk you through some recent work we've done with United Way worldwide. And I'm going to kick it over to you, Omoiye.
Thank you, Hayley. Is that my first slide? I'm jumping right into that.
Yeah, you're jumping right into this, but you can get whatever.
All right. So just to give you a little background about United Way, I come to the table with the assumption that everyone knows who we are, what we do, but the brand research that we conducted definitely tells us that that is not the case. But United Way is a 138-year-old organization, started in the US in Denver, Colorado. I always say, if you look at the history of the United Way, it sounds like a joke. Two priests, a rabbi, and a woman and we're meeting and having drinks or something, right? And that's literally the impetus of how the organization came together. You have these people from diverse backgrounds and genders, and they came together with a common cause to make change in community and to utilize the community to do that. And so that has been our mission moving forward. So our mission has not changed. What we came to realize in 2020, I can't even remember what year it is, in 2021, early 2022, we had new leadership come on board. And one of the first things that we recognized that our brand was definitely in need of some TLC. We were under steady decline from our workplace campaign, which was our largest revenue source, how we pretty much fund the work that we do in the local communities. All of our fundraising was down across the board, and we were not really seen as innovative or relevant. And so we partnered with Hayley because we understood that we wanted to really invest in our brand. In order for us to turn the needle in all of these other areas and be this transformative organization, we really needed to have a level setting and understanding of sort of where our brand existed, what people know about us, so that we could build on that. And so in partnering with Additive and team, we undertook this process. We knew it was going to take us about 2 years, but we really started to root ourselves in research. And as Hayley said, we focused for about 18 months, I think about 15 to 18 months. We really looked at the research, and we conducted extensive qualitative, quantitative, and desk research. And we are a global organization. I didn't say that, but the United Way has a footprint across 34 countries and territories around the globe. And again, we're in 95% of communities here in the US alone. And so when we were looking at not just how we were showing up in the US, but look at our global brand, and we really want to invest in that. So we started with research. We conducted surveys in 16 different countries. We had those surveys translated into 10 different languages, because not only are we looking at our brand, we're also looking at our messaging and the way that we talk about ourselves and how we show up in communities and how do we support this broad network of communities. United Way is also a federated structure. So if you know anything about working in a federated structure, that there's every local United Way has its own CEO, its own board of directors, and often its own sort of objectives of what they want to achieve, because they are supporting the community. So at the global headquarters, we are sort of like the parent company with loose tentacles, right? Talk about having flexibility in the framework. The federated structure allows for that, but we are able to provide guidelines. So what I knew that we needed to do was have credibility within our network. We needed to involve our network in this process from the very beginning. And Hayley can attest, when we first started doing this and talking to our global network to get feedback, we felt like we had been in a boxing match coming out of some of those conversations. And it was because, for a number of reasons, there had been a deteriorating relationship between our global headquarters and our local United Ways. And so we needed to rebuild that. And then there was a credibility issue. So we were looking at building our brand internally and externally. So bringing the network along was critical. And I'll talk more about what that process was like, because we had to come up with a very specific strategy in order to do that. But through the brand research, we conducted qualitative desks. We had interviews with key stakeholders, donors, funders, and so on and so forth. But what it told us was that we had three primary challenges. We needed clarity. We had high awareness, but very low understanding. So people recognized our brand, they know the name, they know the logo, but when you ask them what we do, if you ask 10 different people what the United Way does, you got 15 different responses. And we were guilty of it within our own network as well. Improve relevancy. We were not seen, or are not seen, as memorable, innovative. We're not on TikTok, so we're not communicating with with individuals in the spaces and places that they are living and breathing. And then driving affinity. We knew that our net promoter scores were a challenge. And again, I said, United Way we're a 100-year organization. So as you can imagine, we have baggage, right? And so, in some of the more mature markets like the US, like Canada, our net promoter scores are in the double negative. But in some of our newer markets where we have not been around as long and we are working in a different way with the community, we saw much higher scores. So we utilize the US number as sort of our baselines to say, this is where we are from an NPS score. And so that's our baseline for all of the work that we're going to do and how we're going to measure how we're moving the needle moving forward. So once we had all of the research and we knew we needed to focus on creating clarity, we started to focus on the brand strategy and how are we going to tell our story. So as Hayley said, a brand it's more than just a logo. It's an experience. It's how people experience your organization. It's how you as an organization thinks, acts, and communicates. And so we needed our brand strategy to really be centered in our promise. Our promise is aligned with our mission, and that is to mobilize community to action so that all can thrive. We are mobilizing communities for the common good across the globe. That then led us into our pillars. And through the research, and again, extensive research around this, we recognize what are our strengths and what are those greatest areas of opportunity. And so let's lean into those strengths. And our strengths are really what differentiate us from that crowded 10 million NGO space. It's that we are connective. People see us as a conduit, whereas though we bring communities together, we bring individuals together, and we bring donors and funders together to address a common issue. We're responsive. United Ways are in local communities day in and day out. We're in communities when events happen, like for instance, the LA fires that we were just talking about. And then we're still in those communities long after all of the media has packed up and gone away. We're still in those communities being responsive and working with people who are impacted. And then obviously we're scalable because we are a global organization. And so we have this hyper local focus, but then we can also expand that out globally. So we leaned into our strengths, which is our pillars, and then that also led us to identifying what is our personality? How are we telling our story? And our personality has to be engaging, energizing, elevating. And I always say inspiring, but that messes up the E alliteration. But I think that we also have to be inspiring because we need to be excited about the work that we're doing. We need to tell our story in a consistent way that really drives people to want to be involved in our organization. So we started with the research. That then took us to the brand strategy, and that's going to take us into the storytelling. Next slide, Hayley.
And I should just give a shout out to our friends at Edge Research, who helped us facilitate the research in 16 countries in language. It was quite complex. It obviously took a lot of time, so just wanted to respond to the question in the chat. But one thing I think we should note, Omoiye, is there was definitely some significant understanding of some of the language, particularly in South Korea, which was really interesting. I think one of the things we saw, which may be relevant to many of you who are thinking about how to navigate some of the discussions around DEI language right now.
Mm-hmm.
One thing we saw 2 years ago was equity in particular is not well understood, particularly globally. It is something we've been talking about in the US for a long time. It's not really understood and interpreted in the same way in Asia and in Africa.
And in some South American countries as well, Hayley.
That's right. So one of the things that we did, which was actually very fortunate that we did that research, is we took sort of the intention behind the ideas and used plain language. And that has positioned us very well to meet the moment, which is how do we transcend acronyms or sort of nomenclature that we're using as a field and just use plain language to connect with people, because one of our voice attributes or pillars, as Omoiye noted, is connective. And the other is responsive. So listening and responding to communities informs how we frame things, which is a good segue to the impact areas.
Yes, thank you for that. And I would also add when we talk about how we communicate and tell our story, using that plain language, speaking in terms, and you'll see on the slide in front of you, and I'll talk about the impact areas, but we're talking about doing things for all and realizing full potential instead of using really high, big, lofty socioeconomic words like that, which is what we were accustomed to within our organization. I also think it's important to note that the research also informed us that we have a tendency to talk in big grand numbers, right? That we work with 45,000 corporate partners in the US. That we engage, we have, 55,000 volunteers at our ready, when we're ready to need to activate in the US. And so really using numbers that speak to the human side of what we're doing and how we're impacting people. So we're telling a broad story, but we're doing it through a singular or sometimes just a scaled down lens. And that was really helpful and impactful when we looked at how we're telling our story and how we're using this framework to do that across our global network. So previously, prior to the brand refresh work that we did, we talked about our work in three areas, and we called them focus areas. It was health, education, and economic mobility. Well, those are categories, right? And again, thinking about that, how do we differentiate ourselves in that space? We really want to talk to the work that we do and the uniqueness of it. And so, what we landed on was these four now impact areas, because again, listening to the research told us that we need to focus on the impact that we're making in communities. So, we've come up with this framework: healthy community, improving health and well-being for all, again, using that plain language; youth opportunity, helping young people realize their full potential; financial security, creating a stronger financial future for every generation; and then community resiliency, addressing urgent needs today for a better tomorrow. And I hope you can hear like the descriptors really sort of define what each of those impact areas mean. And what I then did was took it a step further, because again, with a federated structure, I can't just mandate that this is what we're doing. So even to build out these impact areas in this framework, we had to go through an intense process within our network where we did so much testing and retesting and going back and getting feedback and then showing the outcome of that feedback and how we were able to integrate that into something that was digestible for the global network. So the bullets that you see underneath are just examples of the work that we do and how it can ladder up or aligns in one of the four pillars or areas of impact. But I also want to note that some of the work that we do can live in multiple area impact areas at the same time. And it's all about how you tell the story and frame it, whether it falls into one of those four. But plain language is key. Hayley, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you. I've gotten a bunch of questions in the chat. Just wanted to underscore, Additive conducted the research together with Edge Research. We did qualitative and quantitative. Omoiye, I think the quantitative research in 16 countries took about 12 weeks. The so we interviewed corporate partners, high wealth funders. We interviewed board members, we interviewed staff, etc., community-based partners, and we interviewed folks across the network. And we also, the survey, in addition to interviewing external audiences, we also did a network-wide survey. All of that, all in, was about, I'd say, including the parallel tracking, was about sort of 12 to 14 weeks, but socialization of that research with the board and the network obviously took a little longer. And as I would say, to this whole point about a living entity, we continue to sort of listen and sort of refine based on engagement. So there was the core research that was the input, but there was also additional socialization sessions that we also consider as sort of complementary research that just continue to sharpen and allow us to co-create some of the recommendations you're seeing here.
And I would add that socialization process is ongoing. I am still meeting with funders, stakeholders, our internal stakeholders, and getting feedback about how this is working, if they're applying it for those that have adopted the new brand. And so it's constant two-way communication and getting feedback and looking at how do we continue to refine as our organization evolves. Hayley, the one thing I didn't mention in the research is that we did do a lot of testing against our peers.
Yes.
And I think that's also important to mention. And again, we looked at our competitors or our peers or our sister organizations in the US and abroad. And so just for example, of course, we looked at the American Red Cross and the Red Crescent Society, Oxfam, St. Jude. What are some of the other ones, Hayley? I'm drawing a blank.
We looked at Oxfam. I mean, just a varied, in South America, there was sort of country specific nonprofits. So there's some that are sort of obviously international, global in scale, some in the US, like that are just US specific. So we modulated and worked with actually network leaders in the country to identify that. So they also were involved in co-creating the survey design. We also did obviously look at trends, desk research, as Omoiye mentioned, peer audits, looking at the communication so that when we looked at the quantitative, we could see if there was a cause and effect. So if how they were communicating was informing how they were being perceived by the market. So that was a really interesting sort of exercise in sort of correlation. So all very, very helpful. I think one thing to flag here, because this came up and I think it might just be interesting because I've seen a couple of questions in the chat too, and I'm trying to respond as quickly as I can about some language shifts. I think this is another thing where the research was helpful because it actually anticipated the moment we're in 2 years ago when we conducted it. There was a lot of debate on whether that third pillar should be economic mobility. That came up quite a bit. A lot of people felt very strongly that mobility is sort of a very positive word. But one of the things we found is there are people who can barely even, working families, which is such a big strength of United Way with its work with ALICE, asset limited income. I can never remember the full acronym, constrained.
Employed, asset limited income employed.
Thank
yes.
you. But so much of the struggle is working families who still can barely afford to meet basic needs. And so what we uncovered in the research is actually financial security is honestly a more pressing and urgent frame before we can talk about mobility, because that implies everyone's pursuing sort of the American dream. And that sort of understanding has shifted quite a bit. And the idea of financial security was in fact where people's hearts and minds and stress was. So just again, another reason to sort of challenge assumptions, do testing, and just make sure you're sort of framing in ways that resonate most squarely with the people you connect with.
I'm gonna pick up the pace, Hayley, because
okay, sounds good.
So after we did the strategy, the storytelling, we have our framework for messaging, and then we tackled our visual identity system. And again, the research told us that our logo was flat. It hadn't been updated in decades. And so instead of doing a total overhaul of our visual identity system, we wanted to build on the credibility that it already had. And so we just did a refresh. We did some minor tweaking, as I like to say, but we made the logo a lot bolder. We added colors. We moved our circle of hope, which is the prominent part of our logo, to the left so that we're leading with that. And we moved our name to the right. And as you can see, we added color palettes, typography, icons. We really wanted to give our local, the United Way, our global network, the tools and resources that they needed to tell their stories visually to align with this new brand voice. Next slide. And again, rolling out the refresh brand across this network, it is still ongoing. One of the things that I was challenged with is once we are prepared to launch, is that our board of directors wanted at least 100 local United Ways from across the globe to launch alongside us so that we could get a much better lift. We were having the national air cover. We really needed that ground cover. And it's a way for our local network to start to adopt the brand. I am happy to report that my initial goal was 100, but when we launched this brand in October of 2024, we did it with 392 local United Ways across a number of different countries as well. And the reason that is so impressive, it is because of the federated structure. So while we were doing the research, we had already started socializing, engaging the network, getting critical feedback, utilizing key opportunities within our global network for me to present. And so, I was on a roadshow for about 2 years. So it's really important that we continue that momentum as we continue to move forward in the global brand refresh. Next slide. And so part of the plan is that, again, once we had everything in place, we were ready to launch October 21st, I want to say. It should be etched in my brain. But we launched with an awareness campaign, United is the Way. And we introduced new merchandise, new building. We launched a new website. There were a number of different activities that were invested into this. So this is just a few samples of some of the creative and some of the merchandise that we used to launch this new campaign, United is the Way. Again, another example, these next few slides are just a few examples of how we utilize the creative to bring the campaign to life. And I hope that you can see how different this looks compared to some of how the materials previously looked for our organization. Next slide, Hayley.
Community is the way we find our strength and share our hope. It's the way dinner on the table brings a family closer together. It's the way we make sure his first chapter book is the first step on his path to greatness. It's the way we rally in hard times and rise back up stronger than ever. United is the way we come together so everyone can thrive. Join us at unitedway.org.
So this PSA was really the centerpiece of our campaign. So we launched a new PSA in partnership with Comcast, so it is currently in rotation. We're looking at how do we continue to build on that and amplify United is the Way and the PSA. So the PSA is being aired nationally, but we also made it available to all of our local network, local affiliates in our network, so that they have all of these resources available as well. What you see in front of you now are just samples of how some of those early adopters have utilized the assets that we created. My team created more than 700 assets that were made available to our local United Ways, so that it took the burden of transitioning some of the materials, particularly the marketing materials, off of the local United Way, and we made those available for them. Unbeknownst to us, we're at United Way Worldwide. At the same time of the launch is when the South was impacted by Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton. So we had a brilliant idea utilizing some of the resources from our board members. We came up with the idea that we wanted to do a benefit relief special to raise money for those impacted by Hurricanes Milton and Helene in the South. I'll tell you, this came into development from ideation to execution and broadcast was 19 days. Absolutely unheard of to be able to produce a nationally broadcast televised benefit concert. And it was really one of the tactics that we used to introduce our refreshed brand to the world. So the benefit relief show, we had a number of different entertainers that came to the table and donated their time, a number of different performers you can see on the screen. It was broadcast on CBS, CMT, and Paramount. We had billboards in Times Square. We really were able to utilize a number of different tools and resources to lift this up. And I am happy to say that we generated $11 million. We raised $11 million that went directly to those impacted areas. And from a brand and marketing perspective, just think about it. It was like the stars were aligned. We're launching this new brand, and now we have this vehicle to get this brand in front of millions of people through this benefit concert. So again, we ultimately ended up generating, this is just a snapshot of some of the data from that. So with the awareness campaign itself, we generated probably about 380 million impressions, and that's combined impressions. When you add the benefit concert in, we were actually up to close to 2 billion impressions. And that was in Q4 alone. So as you can imagine, my goals for 2025 are probably going to be sky high, since we were able to deliver at such an impressive and impactful awareness campaign. And I think
Yeah,
that,
I know we actually have to, we're nearly at time, Omoiye, so I'm gonna hustle through the rest. That's okay.
Yeah, and you know what, Hayley, we can go past this one because this just kind of outlines what we're doing in 25, continuing that process. So over to the poll.
All right, we're going to do a quick poll, and then I'm going to keep hustling if that's okay, Kareem, if you wouldn't mind. I think we just wanted to see sort of how you're viewing brand today, fixed identity, fluid ecosystem, and mix of both. Not sure. I think it'd be great to just sort of get a quick pulse check. It'll help us power through the next sort of 5 minutes or so. I know there's a bit of Q&A, so I've been trying to answer questions real time. For those who maybe joined a few minutes late and asked who did the visual identity and branding, again, my firm Additive Impact worked with Omoiye and her incredible team to develop, do the strategy, visual identity, and continue to engage in collaboration, along with a full suite of integrated marketing agencies that help with support with activation. Right. Kareem, we can probably close. Awesome. So it looks like some folks are doing a mix of both. And a couple of folks are still working it out. Really appreciate the responses. I'm going to just power through some of the content very quickly because I know we're just about at time. You know, we keep talking about a framework. I don't want to be too abstract. Moya mentioned brand as a lens for the way you think, act, and communicate. That starts with the essence of the brand. So the strategy and architecture, that's sort of like, how do you present your relationships, your programs, etc. That's then translated into brand expressions. That's both verbal and visual. Really important that that's codified. And then it's implemented and activated across experiences. And that includes people, programs, platforms, and places. Just for the folks on the phone from HCZ, just want to send a lot of love to Steph and Scott and team. What an incredible set of partners. I think just one reason I wanted to bring this up is because there's a range of nonprofits here by size. HCZ, obviously incredible founder, Jeffrey Canada, incredible CEO with Omoiye Kinney, dear friend of ours, along with Steph and Scott. You know, when we first engaged, this is what happens if you don't have a framework. There can be brand diffusion. One of the things we did is through our research, and in this case, it wasn't a large scale quant, didn't have the budget for it. So to some of the questions in the chat, it was having conversations with board members, community members, parents, families, to understand how they engage with Harlem Children's Zone. Amazing mission to break the cycle of poverty. One of our big insights was, how do you pull that through so people see a pathway for themselves? So it was really this idea of, by building up opportunity, and that's that cradle to career services and the wraparound supports that Harlem Children's Zone does so well. You can see that much like United Way, we optimized the visual and verbal expression. I want to show this very quickly because this is the point around the importance of a framework. If you're about building up opportunity, that then guides the way you speak, the way you express yourself visually. And we created a continuum for HCZ where they can be playful when they're doing communications around baby college and some of the programs targeted to younger families. And when they need to speak with strategic partners or funders, they can be professional. So the idea of building blocks can be extendable. And, you know, you can see here, it can be extended to illustration style and a whole host of other assets, including some of the work we did with the team around COVID and public health education, vaccine hesitancy, and the like. You can see it extends to their schools, it extends to all over their communications. And that is obviously always through the lens of that framework, which is obviously building up opportunities, breaking the cycle of poverty and building up opportunities. I don't think we're going to have time for a poll, but oh, great, we do. Very quickly, if you could just sort of share what best describes your brand strategy, rulebook, toolkit, playground, still figuring it out, that would be great. We're going to take a couple seconds, and then we're going to hustle through the rest of the content so we can do a bit of Q&A. Awesome. So it sounds like a lot of folks are moving away from the rule book to more of a toolkit approach. Some folks are still figuring it out, but I think the good news is you're all moving towards the future, which is we do, given digital platforms, do need to be more dynamic than sort of how we used to think about branding, fixed, immovable. Very quickly, Omoiye and I worked on the why as well. One of the things I'd say is I shared with you the sort of power of having a framework that then gives you that flexibility. I think when a system is too limited, like it was with the why, all they had was really their logo, which was black and red and pretty hard edged. It didn't really respect the experience of being a Y kid or a Y family. And so you start to see what happened, which was both through words and pictures, people was sort of like pushing a little bit, which meant that the toolkit wasn't robust enough or reflective enough of the personality. Omoiye, I'm going to flip through some images if you want to just speak to
Yeah,
this.
we can go through these really quickly. If you could go back to that slide, I think this is an important slide for the YMCA. No, the next one, Haley. The concept of going from community center to center of community. And so it was from that me to we approach. And you're going from that singular black and red to an expanded color palette, which allowed that flexibility. So again, using the visual identity system to tell the story in a more cohesive way. And as you can see, again, that singular logo went to a series, I think it was a 5-series color palette. And so that really created an opportunity for the organization to position themselves as a cause-driven organization in their community. And their rebranding became the central focus of their internal culture shift as well.
Just a couple of things. The name, we embraced the name the community affectionately calls the YMCA. The YMCA is still there in the bottom. You can see it's their legal name is actually Young Men's Christian Association, but they're not just for young people, men or Christians. And so the embrace of the Y was to deliver on that strategy of community, as was that responsive color palette. No two Ys do the same thing. So it was a way to get at multiplicity. I think one of the questions I got in the chat, the big changes in the research from 2008 to 2018. When we did the work, it was definitely me to we. In 2018, it was me and we. So I've got to see myself in the context of community. So just hopefully helpful. And you can see how we built out shared messaging tools and obviously some other assets. Anything else you wanted to say here, Omoiye, because you were so instrumental in the implementation and activation of the brand?
No, again, just that we had to follow a very similar approach that we utilize at the United Way with engaging our network along in the process and helping them see their role. And so I think, Haley, you've touched on all of the key points, but again, the flexibility in the framework was critical.
I think just because we're tight on time, I'm going to skip a poll and just jump really quickly to a couple of last points, and I'll go through everything super quickly. I think participation and co-creation is something we've been thinking a lot. Omoiye talked about it a fair amount in the context of United Way, not being top down, but really being co-creative and continuing to provide pathways for the network to share their voice and their opinion, and for that to be reflected. And one of the things we did is we'd go back and show how it was reflected. That's been true of our work together, Omoiye and I, our collaboration at United Way, the Y, and also many other organizations as well. Just a quick example, dear friend Karen over at Carnegie Science, just because I wanted to do a slightly different organization, an organization rooted in science, and just show one of the things we saw as a scientist. So this is an organization that pursues everything from the micro to macro, so microbiology to astronomy and dark matter and all sorts of things. And one of the things we wanted to do was think about sort of science through from microscopic to telescopic. So you see that circular shape. And what it really did was serve as a window into wonder and awe of science. So shifting away from being sort of institution-like to actually opening access to science for everyone. And you can see how it could be adaptive and responsive to any subject matter that the scientists were studying. So this excited the scientists themselves, as well as obviously funders who really care about science, which is really important as we think about the contraction of some scientific funders now. We do need to rely on private funding. And this is a great example of always in that C shape, always through the lens of the wonder and awe and boundlessness of science. And then lastly, because we have to wrap, I think it's just worth noting as we're thinking about branding as flexibility within the framework, thinking about AI, VR, AR, really important. I think, as I said earlier, one of the big concerns I have with AI is it's really helpful for nonprofits who are leaner, who don't have scale, especially with content creators. But just like research, garbage in, garbage out, you need to really make sure you have the right inputs. If you're going to use AI, you need to make sure your voice is input, your strategy, so that the content coming out actually doesn't lose your humanity, which is why we all do the work we do. and that we lose our point of distinction. That's really important. And I know Michelle, one of our strategic partners, is on the phone. Just very quickly, this is because I got a couple of questions around small nonprofits. It can be daunting to see maybe a United Way or a Y on the screen. This is a very small nonprofit, STEM nonprofit. One of the things we did is we looked at their programming, saw that it wasn't just STEM programming. All the program was showing young people how to use tools and technologies to create things that make the world better. And so it was really this idea of tech with purpose. And we created a whole playground where they could use all the pieces and parts that actually come in their maker toolkit and create infinite characters and ways to implement and sort of show tech with purpose, whether it's gaming, whether it's maker spirit. And to this point around emerging technologies, they actually got to use some of the 3D printers to create characters and creatures based on what's in their maker toolkit that they get as part of the program. So talk about bringing all the themes together, co-creation, participation, harnessing new technologies in ways that make sense to the brand. This is a great example, and hopefully we've shown you a range. And I'm going to kick it over to you, Omoiye, to wrap us up.
All right, so hopefully you found all of this information useful. Again, as Hayley said, going back to the top, these were the themes that we wanted to share with you, but look at the takeaways and that's kind of what I focus on, is that, having something that's fluid and not fixed, a playground, not a police state, responsive, not reactive, curating, don't control, and immersive, not diffusive. Those are the key takeaways that we hope you're walking away from this session with today.
And just want to thank you all. I know we covered a lot of ground, Sean. I don't know how much time we have for questions, but I know we have office hours.